Hello, everybody. My name is Bill Jones, and I am one of the authors of Politics UK, the 10th edition of, and this is an interview which we have put on the website as part of our attempt to involve people from the front line of politics to tell you really what it's really like, rather than us lot academics writing about what we think it's like. There's a big difference. But just to go on in that vein, it's interesting because the subject of the interview today is Anneliese Dodds, who in fact is an academic as well as being a frontline politician. So it'll be particularly interesting to hear what she has to say. Just to say a couple of things about Anneliese. She had a glittering academic career, first from Oxford, Masters from Edinburgh, PhD from LSE, amazing success there, and she was well on the way to getting a professorial chair at an embarrassingly young age, I'm sure, when she decided in 2014 to stand as an MEP, and then later on, 2 or 3 years later on, she stood for Oxford East in the 2017 election, and is now an MP, and was in the first shadow cabinet that Keir Starmer assembled. She was the shadow chancellor. So she's already had a taste of the big time, the tough times as well, I'm sure she'd agree. So let me go into the first question, Anneliese, just to say we're delighted to interview you on this new series that we're doing. And the thing that interests me about all politicians is, why they were tempted to go into this very strange, quirky, insecure profession, which in fact is so insecure, just a word out of place could end your career, like it did for Edwina Currie that time, the eggs and salmonella, for example. So I just, that's the first question. Why did you give up a startling, meteoric career in the academic world to go into politics?
Oh, well, thank you very much for asking, Bill. And it's really lovely to be with you, having corresponded over so many emails, in fact, in the past. So really good to be with you and those looking at this website.
Thanks for the pandemic for that.
Yeah, well, yeah. That's true. That's true. I mean, I would say there was certainly no master plan in terms of my involvement with organised politics and standing to be a full-time representative. I had been involved in lots of different positions within my party, the Labour Party, for a very long time. So including when I was a student, and I stood for the council, for example. Just when I was doing my finals exams, it ended up being a little stressful because it was that election that got postponed because of the foot and mouth crisis. So I just finished my exams on one day, and then I had the election a couple of days afterwards. So I'd stood for local council. I'd also stood in parliamentary elections, but not in very promising constituencies. And I was thinking I would probably stay working as an academic. As you said, I did do that for a very, very long time. And then actually it was a friend who said to me, look, we need to find people to go on the European list for the Labour Party. There isn't anyone from around here who's going on it. I think we need someone from Oxfordshire. Would you be willing to put yourself forward? And I initially thought, no way, because at that stage, I was pregnant with my first child. And I also hadn't worked in European politics before. And I thought, well, I'm not going to be sufficiently knowledgeable about this. Plus, I've got a baby on the way. It was just going to be too difficult. But I spoke with my partner, who's a very, very lovely man and very supportive. And he said, look, you complain all the time. You watch the television and complain about how particularly Europe back then was being portrayed. Why don't you do something about it? Put your money where your mouth is, kind of thing. So I did go forward for the selection for the Labour Party for MEP, ended up at the top of the list. So I was elected as one of the 10 MEPs. And then again, after obviously we had the Brexit referendum, I was going to have to finish being an MEP. And I thought at that stage that I would go back to being an academic, but the sitting MP in my constituency, Andrew Smith, who'd been the MP for decades, He said that he was standing down. It was quite a shock to people. He'd been, in my view, been an excellent constituency MP for a very long time, but he was standing down. And I thought, right, I'm going to put myself forward for this place because, you know, it's where I live, it's my home, bringing up my family here. And that was the first time when I was elected to Westminster, and obviously I've had another election since. So people quite often ask me, have I got any advice? And I have to say to them, look, I think it's good to have another career outside politics because, just as you said, you know, it's very unpredictable. Sometimes it is about maybe being in the right place at the right time, as well as anything innate.
I suppose it's one of the reasons why politics tends to be selected by, filtered by journalists and lawyers who can actually go back to their professions, if they lose their seats or whatever. And of course, you have that option, I'm sure, which must be rather comforting to you. You could think, well, I can always go back to academe because you were doing so well in that area, and you obviously enjoyed it. So it's something else that you would find fulfilling as a career. But the other question I wanted to ask was the thing about, just the shock of it, suddenly to be, your head is above the parapet, people are shooting at you. It's a culture shock. Being an academic, in a way, it's a safe occupation, isn't it? I think of myself, I don't think I could take the nervous stress of being a politician. Is that correct? Is there a lot of stress involved in it? And if so, did you find it difficult adapting to that?
Oh, I mean, that is a very, very interesting question. I suppose I was aware of some of the stresses and strains, partly because I've been a parliamentary candidate a couple of times, as I mentioned, so I knew about the level of communication, for example, that you get from people. And I think this has changed a lot, and it's quite important, I think, in understanding how politics works now compared to even just 10 years ago, that the volume of kind of organised campaigns, for example, emails, that kind of thing, but then also social media, obviously, has completely revolutionised, I would say, what MPs need to do a lot of the time. So I knew what was kind of awaiting me. I also knew that when I was elected, I would very quickly have people contacting me for help. And I think that's one of the changes that a lot of people are not prepared for if they've not either been a candidate before or they haven't, for example, helped out an MP before, if they don't know any councillors, that kind of thing. Just the fact that from day one, you will have people contacting you saying, in my constituency, for example, I'm just about to be deported out of the country. You've got to help me. I need housing urgently. I've got 3 kids and I'm going to be put out on the street unless you do something about it. That starts immediately. So that kind of pressure, I guess I was prepared for, but quite often I have found other colleagues haven't been ready for that. And, really they need to be, because that's a very important part, I think, of being an MP.
Yeah, so you're almost a sort of social worker, aren't you, at a very high level, or a sort of proto-lawyer as well. It's a strange advocacy role that you have to fulfill on behalf of your constituents. But what about the quality of discourse? I mean, you've been in politics for what, well over a decade and a half maybe. Do you feel that you talked about social media. Do you feel the standard of political discourse has degenerated, has become rather brutalized and frankly uncivil? It seems to me, that there is a case that that's what's happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think in some areas, yes. In others, perhaps there's been less change. And I think there's also now a real appetite for more meaningful engagement too. So I think it's a very, very mixed bag, I would say. I think there's no question that the desire for the little kind of 10-second or less clip certainly is driving quite a lot of politics now. You can kind of see how, and I find it a bit frustrating, but if MPs are giving speeches, that they'll just read off what they've written to try and get the little clip, rather than actually responding to what others have said previously and really trying to bring the debate on, which is what they should be doing, in my view. So certainly that has changed. But I have to say, I think, you look at, for example, some of the tabloids 10, 20 years ago, were they really that different in the way that they portrayed issues? Not necessarily. I think social media has turbocharged some of that, but it's not necessarily a massive difference in kind, I would say, to what we had previously.
What about the abuse? That's something that Jess Phillips is very strong on, and the fact that women in particular come in for quite a bit of really vitriolic abuse. And I can see you'd need to have a pretty thick skin to put up with that. I mean, look what it did for Meghan Markle, for example. She found it impossible. She had to leave the country.
Yeah, I think certainly the ubiquity of social media, I think, has turned that up, no question about it. And the fact that obviously people can be completely anonymous on social media, they can say things that they would never have the courage to say to your face, or even to, write into a newspaper with their name and address. They will say on social media. I think there are lots of strategies for dealing with that. I'm very well aware that, for example, Twitter is not real life. It's a very, very different place. And therefore, it's important not to get too dragged in relation to that. But I suppose I would just say one other thing, which is that I think it is very dependent on, unfortunately, people's different characteristics. So, for example, Diane Abbott has received a huge amount of abuse over the years, and still receives, much, much more than other MPs. And, obviously a lot of this is nastily racist, as well as kind of related to her gender. Those with disabilities as well quite often will get more abuse, so and who are LGBT. So yes, it can be a pretty nasty place sometimes, I would say, unfortunately, social media.
Yeah. Okay. Just to sort of shift a little bit the emphasis, moving on to democracy at the present time. Do you feel that it is working? Do you feel that your job as an MP, a representative, a senior figure in the party, do you think it's actually working? Do you think that people are getting what they want out of the system? Do you think that it's possible for MPs to actually make the system function? Obviously with the help of civil servants and the whole masses of serried ranks of other people. But do you feel it's in a good place, or do you feel it's struggling?
Yeah, there are certainly many problems that I'll come on to in a moment. But overall, I would say the UK, I suppose, tradition really of an independent civil service, of a parliament where there is that independent arbitration by the speaker, where there are those rules and regulations, albeit unwritten ones often, or not codified ones, but where they do keep us in line and where they ensure that there's some fairness in the system. I do genuinely think that's very, very different from the political setup in lots of other countries. I had the privilege when I was an academic of studying a number of other countries where, for example, corruption was endemic, and you really do see the difference. There's no question about that. Once you have corruption as the modus operandi, every single question then becomes, not just politicized, but obviously linked to, people's individual connections to money and everything else. If I'm honest, I think some of the developments over the last year have been quite worrying in that regard. Still very, very different from many other countries, but we do need to have transparency. We need to have proper rules being followed, especially around the use of public money. And I've not been very happy with a lot of what's happened over the last year when it comes to that. But overall, I would say, I think a lot of the institutions broadly have served us well, but they do need to adapt. They definitely need to adapt, particularly for younger people to be more involved, for people all over the country to be more involved. We in the Labour Party, we set up this commission with Gordon Brown, working on the future of the UK. And I think there's a big, big series of questions there about how people right across the UK can feel that it's a setup that works for them and where we need to make change. So it's most definitely not perfect, but I think still in comparison to many other places, we could do a lot worse, I suppose I'd put it that way.
It needs a little bit of TLC, or quite a lot of TLC, really, to make it work a little bit more effectively. Interesting question you raised there about the union, and of course, being from Scotland yourself. Do you think that Labour has, this is moving into a slightly policy question, but I'm interested anyway, given your background. I mean, do you think that there is a serious danger that Scotland is going to break away and the union will be no more, which would have huge implications for the future of everybody living on this island?
Yeah, well, it most definitely would. And clearly there are some who want that outcome. That is what the Scottish Nationalist government clearly is committed to. I have to say, I personally think that would be a dreadful outcome. People quite often say, well, the kind of intellectual case for the union is a really, really clear one, and it's the emotional case that's harder to make. Well, for me, it's an emotional case as well. I've got kind of English blood as well as Scottish blood, and I've got Welsh in my family as well, incidentally, because my partner's half Welsh. But I really do think that actually we have such an important shared history. And I do think when we look at the big questions for the future, climate crisis, challenges the digital economy, the rise of China and other countries as well, I just think we can do so much better when we're together. So I think that we do need to keep that union. I think it's very important, but we've got to reform it. We've got to make sure that it really works for all of the UK, so everyone feels they've got a stake in it.
Hmm. Okay, just a little thing about the workload of being a politician, a frontline politician as well. I mean, were you shocked by that? I know you must have been a very hard-working academic, to produce the record that you have. I mean, but nevertheless, have you found that, being a frontline politician puts a big burden on you physically? I mean, you do have to be really fit to be an effective politician, don't you? And it must be stressful, particularly when family and children make demands upon you as well as everything else.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say that I feel very, very privileged. I mean, obviously, it's a wonderful job to have in the first place. I always say whenever I go to schools, it's the best job in the world, and I think it is because every day is different. You get to meet fascinating people, and just occasionally you can change things and make life better for people, and that that there's nothing better than that. So I think it's a wonderful job, but also, of course, compared to lots of other quite high stress jobs, arguably, you have a lot of remuneration. Clearly, there's no question about that. It's a well-paid position. And you do have a fair bit of control a lot of the time over what you do. You can see the outcomes of what you do. And I think comparing that to lots and lots of other jobs where people have very little control over, the hours that they work, the income that they're going to receive, to me, that would be a far more stressful situation to be in. And I have to say, so far, I've been, very lucky. Obviously, a very supportive partner, which is wonderful. That really helps, and I feel really privileged to represent a place like Oxford East, where there's lots of really wonderful people there. Very supportive local party for me as well. For my political party is very supportive and work well with them. I suppose sometimes, occasionally, there are the situations where you think people might need to kind of switch the politics off. Perhaps one of the funniest that I had was when I was in a swimming pool changing room with my little. I think it was my son actually at the time. We were both having our shower after a swimming class, and somebody decided that was the very moment to lobby me on a particular issue. And I thought, there is a bit of a time and a place, just about anywhere apart from in the swimming pool showers when I'm literally about to get changed would be okay. But yeah, it is a wonderful job, I must say, it really is.
Okay, final question. Estelle Morris was, when she was a member of the cabinet, if you remember, years ago, about a decade and a half ago, she was asked by one of her colleagues, what are they like, the people in the cabinet? What are they really like? And she said, well, the good news is they're just like you and me. And then the bad news is they're just like you and me. What would be your comment on that?
I mean, yes, there's a lot of truth to that, certainly. I mean, I have to say, from my colleagues, I've learned something from every single one of them. I mean, clearly, they're representing different parts of the country. They've come to politics through a whole range of different routes. They're all working on their different policy areas, which are all fascinating. So I do find it just genuinely very, very, very interesting indeed to be working with a bunch of such interesting people. And, obviously, I would argue you'd expect me to say this within my party, but, it's interesting people right across all the different parties in Parliament, and people who, I feel this about politics generally, you get to meet people that if you did a different kind of job or you were involved in a different kind of activity, you would never be likely to have that interaction with. And that really is a really terrific thing, I think, about politics in general.
Okay, the final question. Michael Heseltine, it's so interesting, I'm sorry. See, I'm a political obsessive, you see, as well, in terms as a student, not in the game. But Heseltine always used to talk about getting the politics bug. And that's really my first question, was sort of touching on that there is something that is very compelling about being in politics, and it becomes like once the bug has got you, then you're done for. You'll never get rid of it. And Heseltine is a good example of that, as he's highly, highly political, and he can't keep out of it. He has to keep on dipping in now and again. Do you think you've been infected by the bug?
I think I probably have, but I think there are lots of ways in which the symptoms of the bug can play out, I suppose. So I've always had a lot of dealings with local councillors, not least because my partner's one, but because, I know many local politicians. And I think just that, once you have that experience of managing to push through, generally with the help of other people as well, some who say that they do all this on their own, but generally with the help of other people, push through some change that makes life better for people. There is nothing better than knowing that you have improved people's lives because of a decision that you've been associated with, that you've helped to push through and you've helped to change things, or that some injustice has been righted because of the pressure, that you working, as I said before, again, generally with others, have managed to achieve. And of course, that's not just about organised politics. That can come through a whole range of different routes as well: journalism, trade union movement, you name it. Lots of other organisations involved in that political change. But certainly, yes, once you've experienced it, it's something that's very difficult to walk away from.
Okay, well, thanks very much. And I hope that any student who gets to watch this interview will be inspired by that final message. It is something that you can do that is all-consuming. It takes over your life, but it enables you to make a difference, to do something to improve the world. God knows that's an important message for young people. Okay, thanks very much, Anneliese, and thanks for your time, and thanks for your very interesting responses.
It's a real pleasure. Good to be with you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.